Hello everybody, I'm Garrett and you're watching 11 Bang Bang. A couple of weeks ago I did a video on the top 6 myths that I had found on the trapdoor rifle around the internet, and that video went over really well. It got a lot of traction, quite a few views, and people really enjoyed it. So let's do another list this week. This week we are ranking, or I am, my personal top 6 favorite firearms of the early 19th century. Few rules will go into this criteria. First and foremost, this is just my opinion from my experiences. Each and every one of these guns has to be a gun that I have had personal, extensive experience with, either an original or a modern replica of said gun. Also, the guns have to be predominantly used in the first half of the 19th century. They can be made in the 18th century, but if they really see their production ramp up and people really start using them between the years of 1800 and 1860, that's when they will fit into this list. Obviously, we are going from the year 1800 to the American Civil War, and anything made in or after the year of 1860 won't count, will be a completely separate list. Also, like I said, these are mostly guns that I have experience with, and I'm more of a civilian firearms guy myself, and so from this era that we're not going to be dealing a lot with military guns, a few of them, but for the most part this will be guns that civilians, homesteaders, or the average person could have used in the time period. So without further ado, let's get on to our list. And coming in at number 6, we have the Colt Patterson Revolver. Now, this one is almost an honorable mention. It's not a great design. It has some issues, but since it is the first of its kind, it has developmental promise, shall we say. This is the gun that really put Colt on the map right off the bat. He came out with this in 1836. And he would run his Patterson, New Jersey factory, also known as the Old Gun Mill, up until about 1842, when he would go out of business for a while. So obviously this gun didn't do well. It's not because people didn't like it. It's not because it failed necessarily. It really was just too expensive to produce. It had a lot of moving parts compared to later revolvers, and it was very slow to load. However, when they did ship these out to the Texas Rangers, they came with 2 cylinders. And Jack Hayes did make very good use of the Patterson revolver in the early Comanche Wars. With around 5,000 units being made, both rifles, shotguns, and handguns, and the Texas model that you see us using here being probably one of the most popular, I'm going to put this on the list at number 6 as one of my favorites just for its history. Number 5, yeah, I know it's way down on this list, a lot farther down than most people would put it, and that is going to be Jake and Sam's Hawken rifle. Now, these guns really got into production around 1825-ish. You know, it's not the mountain man rifle that most people think it is, and not really a lot of them were made in flintlocks like some people believe, maybe 1 or 2 or 10, but mostly this is a gun that is going to fit into the 1850s. Which, when put in its place, it becomes one of my absolute favorite firearms. Not as the gun of the mountain man, which, grant you, there were a few that went to the mountains, but these were high-end, heavy target rifles. That's what they really were. They could be used, of course, for hunting buffalo or anything, with most of them being chambered anywhere from 50 to 68 caliber. A lot of 62 calibers, a lot of 58 calibers. Good for buffalo hunting. I have personal records of the people around my area using them for buffalo hunting, and it's a really good rifle. Maybe not the quintessential mountain man gun that we may see later on this list, but obviously a great gun that would go on into the 1850s and find its place on the Oregon Trail, the California Trail, and the Santa Fe Trail as the, what you call a mountain rifle, the plains rifle, anything like that. Really came in handy, really saw its most production and its most use in the 1850s with homesteaders and people moving west, and then really faded off fast after the 1860s. You're not going to see it for a huge amount of time. There were not that many made. That's why it comes in at number 5 and not further up the list, but still, overall, this big heavy gun used by Tom Tobin, Kit Carson, Jim Bridger, all of them mostly after the mountain man in the fur trade era, still going to come in pretty high here, and I am going to put it at number 5. Number 4, we're coming in with Colt's Dragoon. All 3 models, or 4 models if you consider the Whitneyville transition model a Dragoon. Now, the reason I love this gun is because a lot of praise these days goes to the Walker. But in reality, the Walker's place in history is pretty insignificant. Even in the Mexican-American War, they really got there late and didn't have a lot of time to make a huge impact. However, we should not give the predominance to the Walker. That should honestly go to the Dragoon. With over 25,000 units made and spanning from 1848 all the way up into 1860, this was the predominant big bore revolver of the era. Civilians used them, they were used in militaries, they were used for buffalo hunting with varying degrees of success depending on who you talk to. And this gun was just used all over the West. The Dragoon revolver is really the big bore revolver of the early 19th century. Wild Bill Hickok was known to have carried one, and so were many other people of the era. Also saw some limited use in the early Civil War. This revolver is the big bore, knockdown, dirty Harry, shall we say, revolver of the era, and really made its mark on the American West. And it really is one of my absolute favorite revolvers. Although it is slightly less powerful than the Walker, believe me, it's still plenty powerful to get the job done, and comes in at number 4 on this list for that reason. Now, here we have another one of my favorites, which some people are going to find odd. This is the Southern Mountain Rifle. Now, many times when we think of 19th century history, we think of west of the Mississippi. But in reality, there's a lot more history going on east of the Mississippi. And east of the Mississippi, big game was running out. And so the larger 50, 54 caliber rifles and 58s were no longer being used predominantly there, when mostly what people were hunting were squirrels and rabbits and small game just to get by. And people did that for 100+ years just to get by. And this was the gun they used to do it with, the Southern Mountain Rifle. The design comes around in around 1800. Obviously, it looks a lot like what people consider a Pennsylvania or Kentucky rifle, but it is a distinct variation of that, coming out of the southern Tennessee mountains, North Carolina, that area over there. We have a gun that is mostly chambered anywhere from 32 up to about 40 or 45, and is predominantly a squirrel rifle. Very long rifle, very super thin and light and elegant, and as you can see here, comes with iron mountings. And although people like Davy Crockett had fancy Pennsylvania style rifles, Davy Crockett is quoted as saying for a working rifle, what he preferred was a gun with iron mountings, simple, good, long sight radius, simple gun, and this is what that was. This is also known by a lot of people as the poor boy rifle. People who did not have a lot of money could take this rifle and buy it for a little less money and feed their family for decades. Alright, coming down to number 2. As you remember earlier when I talked about the Hawken, I said this is not the quintessential firearm of the mountains and the fur trade era. Well, number 2 is, and that is going to be the Northwest trade gun. Although this was designed before the 19th century, this is probably the most popular firearm between 1800 and 1840 used. Everybody had them. They were brought in, they were made in London, brought in through the Hudson Bay Fur Trade Company and other companies, and just populated the American West. They were also used heavily by the natives during the War of 1812, but in reality it was one of the cheapest guns, a smooth bore, usually around 60 caliber or 62, whatever you want to call it. Usually shoot a 60 caliber round ball, and they were used all over the West for years and years and years. Millions of these were made. You don't ever hear about them. Probably really the gun that actually won the West though, because trappers tended to use them because A, they were cheaper than a rifle, and B, they were far more versatile than a rifle. Obviously later on many mountain men would get Hawkins and the Lehman trade rifle, which almost made this list, but I haven't had a lot of personal experience with the Lehman, so that's the only reason it's not actually on this list. However, the Northwest trade gun I have had quite a bit of experience with, and I love it. The main reason the smooth bore flintlock and later on percussion cap gun was so popular is because you could hunt quail in the morning with bird or swan shot, and you could hunt moose in the afternoon with a big heavy 60 caliber round ball. This was a very versatile gun. Also very well noted to be used for buffalo hunting. And of course, like I said, cheap. It comes with this dragon, serpent, whatever you want to call it, on the back side of the lock plate here, and that was actually kind of a status symbol for a lot of natives. And the gun would hang on and persist, and it really even carried on into the 19-teens, being sold by the Hudson Bay Fur Trade Company in at least 1913 to northern Canadian native tribes. So yes, this gun is by far probably the most popular, shall we say, firearm of the 19th century, and definitely has to fit on the top of this list, and is a very, very overlooked piece of history. Go to the Museum of the Fur Trade and just take a look and see how many rifles there are there and how many smoothbore Northwest trade guns there are there. You're going to see that in the era, the Northwest trade gun outnumbered rifles about 20-1 in the mountains of the 18-teens, 20s, and 30s. Very popular gun, very good gun, one of my all-time favorites, and number 2 on this list. Alright, coming down to number 1 on this list, it's the Ranger. I'm just kidding. This is the model of 1851 Colt Navy revolver. Obviously, there's other guns on this list that did more for history and are more prolific, but this is my own personal list, remember, and the 1851 Navy is going to come in at number 1 for me for all firearms made or used from 1800 to 1860. There was a point in Texas where they said there were more 1851 Navies there than there were men. So that was probably an exaggeration, but the 1851 Navy was used during the Civil War, obviously, but before that, for the 1850s, it was used all over the countryside. It was used everywhere from New York to California with great success. There are stories upon stories. Wild Bill Hickok used one for a long time after cartridges came out, and many other people used them. The Texas Rangers used them. They were used in the California gold fields. And in reality, a Hawken rifle and a 51 Navy go pretty good side by side. Even actually a Hawken rifle and a Dragoon, but the 51 Navy came in quite a bit cheaper than the Dragoon and still got the job done. This was what we would call now the gunfighter's pistol. In my opinion, this is the revolver that ended dueling, because let's face it, when you were dueling with flintlock smoothbore pistols, you had a chance of survival. When these things came along, it was basically murder-suicide, because you're going to hit every time. Anyway, that completes my list of my top 6 favorite guns of the early 19th century. I want to thank you guys for watching. Let me know if your list differs from mine. Write down in the comments what you think. Anyway, trust in God. Keep your powder dry. Bye.